So, since Web Summit started on Monday, 40,000 children under the age of 5 have died from preventable causes around the world. Since Web Summit last year, 250 million people have contracted malaria, and over 1 million have died from that. And since 1975, rates of obesity have more than tripled, and now account for 3 million deaths every single year. So I realize that's probably the most pessimistic introduction to a session today, but it's not all bad news. Over the last 100 years, we've made huge innovations in things like sanitation, immunization, antibiotics. And even better is that it's not slowing down. Over the last decades, we've increased global life expectancy by 5 years on average, which is the fastest rate since 1960s. So the big question is, will we ever have a disease-free world? And over the next 20 minutes, we're going to hear from both sides of the debate. So very pleased to have with me Lynne Davidson, who's Executive Director for the 2020 Microclinic Initiative, who's going to argue for, and Pierre Meulin, who's Executive Director of the Innovation Medicines Initiative, who's going to argue against. So each will have 5 minutes to present their opening arguments. We'll have some questions, and then we'll have our summary remarks. But you'll have a very important role in this as well, because you're going to decide the winner of the debate. So I'm going to ask you now to raise your hands if you think we can look forward to a disease-free world. So if you think we can, raise your hand in the air. So I think that's probably near enough half. So if you put your hands down, and if you can raise your hands if you think that's not possible. Okay, so that's definitely more in that side. So I thought we were going to have a very optimistic audience because of a health tech event. We'll come back at the end, so please keep those thoughts in mind. We're going to take some questions as well, so if you want to contribute to the discussion, send me some questions on the Web Summit app, and we'll try and ask some of those in a minute. But Lynne, you're up first, 5 minutes on the clock, and then we'll come back to Pierre.
Okay. Thank you, Ashley. I want to thank both the moderator, Dr. Ashley McKimm, and my debate partner here, Dr. Pierre Meulin. I really am very honored to be on stage with both of you. I'm an American political scientist. I don't know if that was part of the introduction. So I'm not 100% sure if I received the invitation for this debate that I was supposed to receive. I kind of think there might be another Lynne Davidson out there somewhere in the world who's sitting by her computer waiting for her invitation to participate in this debate, who might be a microbiologist or something. Again, I'm a political scientist. Now, and I'm from the US. I don't want to talk about American politics today for a couple of reasons. One is it's not why we're here. And number two, I really just don't want to talk about American politics. I'm happy to engage in this debate, and I think it will be pretty interesting. I look forward to the next 20 minutes or so. But just to put a little bit of context around how this debate is going to proceed, I have a son, and he was in high school a couple years ago, and I was driving him and his friends around, and his friends didn't know what to call me. They're in high school, and I'm pretty casual, so I thought they could call me Lynne, but they were a little uncomfortable with that, and they thought maybe, well, I'll call her Dr. Lynne. So one of the kids said, Dr. Lynne, you're not really a doctor, right? And I said, no, I'm not really a doctor. He said, well, you have a PhD. I said, yeah, I have a PhD. Well, what's your PhD in? So, political science. And he said, well, that's the easiest one to get. So that's the context for this discussion today. I have the easiest PhD there is to get, and I am debating the microbiologist on whether or not there will ever be an end to disease. So just to lay the groundwork. So I'm going to talk about, I get about 2 minutes to talk to you about something that I know a little bit about, which is healthcare in sub-Saharan Africa. My organization works in Kenya. And I have to say, when working in Kenya, I look around and I do not see the end of disease anytime soon. But when I look at the context of the enormous leaps that we've made since the start of the Millennial Development Goals, where a bunch of smart people sat around and tried to figure out what can we do in the next 2 decades. And they came up with a bunch of goals, and that process ended in 2015. And during the Millennial Development Goal period, we were able to drop the rate of HIV infection by something like 40% over that period, which is tremendous. We were able to save probably close to 8 million deaths due to HIV because of the number of people we were able to get on antiretroviral therapies. We distributed something like 900 million, it's a really hard number to wrap my head around, 900 million insecticide-treated mosquito nets. That's just tremendous for the prevention of malaria. Consequently, the global malaria incident rate has fallen by 37% over that time period. So we've really made tremendous progress. TB, our ability to prevent and diagnose and treat TB since the year 2000 has allowed us to save about 37 million lives. So these are tremendous numbers. And I think Ashley made reference to the number of children who die every day. And that number is something like 16,000. I don't know if that's exactly what Ashley said. It's a number like 16,000 a day. Children under the age of 5 die. But that's half of what it was not very long ago. So I think our progress toward the Millennial Development Goals was tremendous. Now we're in a new phase. Some of you might have heard of the Sustainable Development Goals. And so we have a whole new set of goals because no, we did not reach the goals that we set out for ourselves by 2015. But we made a lot of progress. So that's where my hope lies. And over the next few minutes, I'll talk to you about innovation, which is what you all want to hear about. I'm sure you're going to wait for me to tell you the key to living forever. So we'll talk a little bit about innovation. We'll talk a little bit about a shift in focus away from treatment of disease to prevention of disease, which has had an enormous impact on the existence of disease itself. And I might get desperate because, again, I'm debating a molecular biologist. I might get desperate and I have a couple of tricks up my sleeve in case I need to resort to something ridiculous in order to get some points in this debate. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you, Lynne. So we're going to go straight on to Pierre, and we'll come back for some questions after that.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Ashley, and also very happy to be joining Lynne on this platform. So I'm going to take quite a different approach to this, which is one from a biology, systems biology kind of perspective. And we are dealing with here very complex biological systems. And all life forms on this planet go through normal cycle of life and death. And death is usually between life and death. You know, you can have things that go wrong with your bodies. And those are, of course, disease generation things that happen. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what those are, because there are two main disease generating things. One set comes from within, which is essentially to do with your own genome. You have 3 billion letters of code in every cell in your body, and that determines a lot to do with health and disease. And the second main disease generator comes from exterior factors, and these are, of course, infectious diseases, which, as Lynne knows a lot about these, have plagued humankind for many thousands of years. Of course, in the big picture, life on this planet started about 4 billion years ago. So life forms have taken some time to adjust to each other. It started off very much as a unicellular world, of course, 4 billion years ago. And if you look at this in a life clock scenario, where 4 billion years ago is 12 o'clock, and then you go around, human life started around 2 minutes ago, right? So we're very much newcomers into this world of biological complexity. And if you look at then our two generators, the first one, our genome, so there are 3 billion letters of code. We're all very close to each other. because we're all Homo sapiens, but we probably have a few thousands of letters of code different from one to another. So I have a few thousand letters of code different from Lynne, and your next door neighbor will have a few thousand letters of code different from you. And those differences are natural mutations that occur during conception when the sperm meets the egg and chromosomes come together, and during meiosis. But those can deliver, and those are the genome that you have, the genetic cards that you're given when you're born, or at conception rather, will have some disease-creating potential that are spontaneous, that we cannot predict, that come from nowhere. And the chances of that happening, of course, are among billions of people across the world are essentially infinite. So those are the internal generators of disease. And then we have the external generators of disease, which are essentially infectious diseases. And I'm just going to, my last minute here, I'm just going to pinpoint some of the relatively new diseases that we have, because 70 years ago, we hadn't heard of Ebola virus, we hadn't heard of Zika virus, we hadn't heard of HIV, actually, 70 years ago. We hadn't heard of SARS virus, and we hadn't heard of MERS virus because we didn't know they existed, because they came from zoonotic sort of animals that were becoming more in contact with human because of human activity. Now, those are just a few examples of a huge biological ecosystem of disease that occurs in all life forms, that as we go forward and progress in our human lives, we get exposed to more and more. And although these are new and we have made huge progress in HIV and malaria and all the rest, some of these have been around for thousands and thousands of years, including malaria, TB, influenza, and others. And so I think to have a disease-free world is a pretty much impossible task, given the infinite possibilities of disease generators that we have in front of us. Thank you.
I have a response.
Hold that for 1 second. Because I think we've had two very different opening remarks. One that's kind of highlighted the positive aspects of what we've achieved already, and one that's very much focused on the science of the fact that it's going to be very difficult to eradicate this disease, which are constantly evolving. I'm going to let things heat up a little bit, because I'm going to let you challenge one question, challenge to Pierre, and then Pierre one challenge back to Lynne. So far away.
You want me to phrase this as a challenge?
As a challenge.
Okay, let's see how to do this. I get to pick one? Oh, I have so many. All right, let's talk about the viruses. So the viruses, I understand we have new viruses all the time, right? And I get it. I get flu shots. I got a flu shot last year. It's irrelevant this year. I know that. And sometimes you get the flu shot and they didn't get it right, and it's not even combating the flu that is for that current year. I think they're getting pretty good at this now. So I'm going to ask you something about what's going on. I think that the name of the organization, and there are several like this, and I'm pretty sure you're involved in some of these as well. There's something called the I'm from New York, the New York Influenza Center for Excellence. And I saw they just announced a couple of days ago that one of the things that they're trying to do, or maybe the primary thing that they're trying to do, is find a vaccine that actually works for the flu from year to year. Is that correct? I don't want to say anything wrong. Okay. So I saw an announcement just the other day that I got to read my notes for this because I don't want to say it wrong. They are creating a vaccine that targets the stalk of a protein that covers the flu virus. And my understanding is that current vaccines target the head. And it's the head that keeps changing. And that's what creates the problem where you get the vaccine and the head changed, and that's what we were targeting, and then it's different next year. Now they're creating a vaccine. They've figured out that the stalk doesn't really change much. and that they can now create a vaccine that targets the stalk. So let's see, I think I have the number here of worldwide annual influenza epidemics are estimated to result in about 3 to 5 million cases of severe illnesses and somewhere between 250,000 and 500,000 deaths. That's annual. So that's a lot of deaths we're looking at. Now we learn that this is a solvable problem. Have we not learned that this is a solvable problem? That's my question.
Thank you. Well, influenza vaccination has been a topic of a lot of research over decades and decades. And although this is promising results, I know from New York, I probably do not think that it's the magic bullet, because I don't think there is a magic bullet for many of these things. We have managed, though, and of course, you might find it strange that somebody from the Innovative Medicines Initiative is arguing against this disease-free world thing. But of course, there will be enormous progress, including for influenza. You've seen already, and you know better than I do, Lynn, the HIV story, which is a huge success story in terms of medicine. But my main thesis is that we've only managed to eradicate one infectious disease since the start of medicine development, and that's smallpox. And we have done that through vaccination. So I do believe, and I'm a vaccinologist by profession, so I do know I'm a great fan of vaccines. But I just think some of these bugs, some of the ones we know, and influenza is one of them, and a lot of that we do not know yet, will provide this generation of disease that we will be faced with for eternity, because the biological complexities of what we're dealing with and the biosystems that we're dealing with are such that it's a never-ending. Even if we imagine tomorrow we solve influenza, okay? I'll give you that. But there are just so many things that we will not solve, and those two generations that I talked about are going to fuel this generation of disease, although we will hopefully make a lot of progress in being able to get the big ones and reduce incidences of cancer and diabetes and neurodegeneration and all of these other things that are hitting us, as well as some of the big infectious disease things. But to say that we will be in a disease-free world is, I'm afraid, utopic, and it will not happen.
So Pierre, thank you. Time to get your own back. So you've got a question now for Lynne.
I would ask Lynne, in fact, what is the because I know that people like Mark Zuckerberg as well believe that we will have a disease-free world, and chronic diseases will be solved by 2025 and so on and so forth. So what types of innovation are we going to see that will revolutionize, because we would be talking about a revolution that would see these diseases being solved forever?
So let's maybe talk for a minute about nanotechnology. And so I think it took about $1 billion at one point to sequence the genome. I think you can do that now for about $1,000. So we have an opportunity now. I've got another handy note here. Again, a recent announcement from, let's see if I can find it. This was in I can't find it. That's okay. There was, oh boy, I have so many notes here and I lost the one that I wanted. There was a recent announcement about a gene technology that was used. Here it is. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration announced in August the first gene therapy available in the United States, ushering in a new approach to the treatment of cancer and other serious and life-threatening diseases. Now, this particular gene therapy that was announced in August is for a type of cancer called acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which is the most common childhood cancer. Currently, it's a cancer of the bone marrow and blood. So maybe you can explain better how this works. I'm not going to try to explain the science of it, but when you're talking about genes, where you're able to take an abnormal gene and replace it with a normal gene, for example, using nanotechnology. And this particular announcement in August was actually really tremendous. I mean, this is a life-saving therapy. Again, I'm not going to try to explain the therapy itself, but this is a life-saving therapy for a type of cancer that is the most common childhood cancer in the US anyway. I don't know if that's true in the world. So I think nanotechnology is one of the ways that we're going to make great leaps forward. The viruses that I mentioned a few minutes ago, but we also have technologies like, for example, a disease that might require you to have an amputation. We can now 3D print you a new limb. I mean, these are the kinds of things that we couldn't possibly... 3D print a new limb, we couldn't have talked about that 3 years ago, I don't think, or maybe you guys knew about it. I certainly did not. Again, I'm a political scientist. I don't know this kind of stuff as soon as all you. But these are the kinds of, nanotechnology and those kinds of innovations are just growing by leaps and bounds. And I'm so glad you mentioned Mark Zuckerberg. I think he's putting $3 billion into this effort. He wants to see the end of disease in his child's lifetime. You know, the National Institutes of Health in the U.S. has spent $666 billion in the last 35 years to end disease. I mean, these are numbers that I just can't wrap my head around. Worldwide, we spend $260 billion every year goes into the medical research. I know in the U.S. there are something like 110,000 people right now who call themselves medical researchers in the U.S. according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's almost as many people as call themselves web developers in the U.S., which is something a little bit more than 110,000. There's a lot of money and a lot of resources going towards this, and we are making huge leaps before our very eyes. So, Pierre, I have to say, never is a really, really long time, and I'm not buying it.
So we're nearly out of time. I'm going to let you say one final short sentence if you want to sum up what you said, the most important point, and then we're going to go back to a vote from the audience. So maybe, Pierre, if you can go first.
So never is a long time, but in front of infinity, it's impossible.
Lynne?
I see a lot of really smart people who I put my money in. When you look at the dollars and the human commitment to making this work, I'm very confident.
Wonderful, thank you. Can we have the lights back up for a second? We're going to take a final show of hands. I'm going to make this easy. Can you put up your hand if you've changed your mind in the last 20 minutes? Hardly anybody. For those who,
there's like 3 or 4 over there. I don't know which way they changed.
For the couple of people over there, just keep your hand up if Pierre's convinced you to change your mind. I think, Pierre, you're the winner, I'm afraid. Sorry, Lynne. Thank everybody. Thank both of our speakers, and thank you very much for joining us.